We first begin in Edmonton, where a new name has finally come forward to lead the federal Liberals. After the party spent years courting Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, is finally ready to jump into politics.
I'm here to ask for your support. I'm here to earn your trust, to lead that fight. I'm back home in Edmonton to declare my candidacy for leader of the Liberal Party and Prime Minister of Canada.
Okay, for more on this breaking news story, let's bring in CBC's Marina von Stackelberg. Marina, good to see you. It has been very busy indeed for you guys there in Ottawa. But of course, what we've been waiting for, Mark Carney now, of course, coming to that podium with his pitch to Canadians. Talk to us more about what he had to say.
Well, he is really pitching himself as the potential new Liberal leader who would have the expertise and knowledge of the economy, but is not a politician and hasn't been part of this Liberal government over the last 9 years. He is very much seen as a frontrunner in this race, and he's getting a lot of support from many Liberal MPs. He made his announcement today in Edmonton, where he grew up. His dad actually once tried to win a seat there under the Pierre Elliott Trudeau government. But Mark Carney himself has never been a politician. That does not mean that the Liberals have not been interested in him for a while. They've actually been trying to court him into the party for over a decade. This fall, he joined the Liberals as a special advisor to help them on the economy. But Mark Carney comes from a business financial background. He was the Bank of Canada governor in 2008 when Canada had to weather that very serious economic storm. Unlike the U.S., Canadian banks did not collapse under his watch. He cut interest rates very heavily, which was seen by many as a way to really preserve the Canadian economy. And then in 2013, he helped the UK as it kind of handled Brexit. But he was asked today at his announcement, you've got this experience, sure, but you've never been a politician before. How do you think you can stand up to someone like Pierre Poilievre, who has been a member of parliament since his 20s? And Carney basically said, well, these aren't normal times. He said certain politicians have got us here, in his words, saying, using slogans, slander, sound bites, attacking institutions. And he went on to say some more. Have a listen.
We're in a crisis with an exclamation point put by the Trump tariffs, but we have deeper underlying problems which require us, in my judgment, as an outsider, as someone who's not been a lifelong politician, as someone who's gained tremendous experience, because of where I started here is where I've gained that experience. In my judgment, it's a time to come together and to build as a country. You can't do that when you're insulting more than half of it.
The real challenge for Mark Carney will be introducing himself to Canadians. He's not really widely known by the general population. Actually, at one point, there was a bit of a back and forth with him and one of the local journalists in Edmonton, where I guess they were bringing around his picture to people and asking them if they knew who he was or who, and people were kind of saying, is that Mike? So he kind of joked about it in the press conference today, saying, he has to get Canadians to know him. But he does have a very limited time here. Whoever becomes the Liberal leader might just have a matter of weeks before we are potentially in an election situation. Yeah, indeed. And as we saw him as well, pegging himself as the outsider and whatnot. A lot of people not sort of associating him as being part of the Liberal Party, let alone, as you mentioned there, a politician. But he also talked about the direction now he wants to take the party in. So talk to us about that in terms of how he's going to position himself and, of course, touting that this is the better way to go. Yeah, and he wasn't very specific on details of what exactly he would bring forward as a candidate as to how he would want to move the Liberal Party, but it definitely insinuated that he wanted to move it more towards the center. He said a couple of key things. I am going to be completely focused on getting our economy back on track. He said the far left, you can't take care of vulnerable people if you have a weak economy. You can't redistribute wealth if you don't have the wealth to begin with. He said growth has been too slow, wages have been too low, cost of living is too high. Of course, these are all major concerns for Canadians right now. And specifically, he said the Prime Minister and his team let attention from the economy wander. He's obviously pointing the finger there at former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who was a big part of the Trudeau Liberal government for a very long time. He also was really trying to set himself apart from Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader, saying that Pierre Poilievre is a lifetime politician, someone who doesn't understand the economy, who doesn't have the business experience that he does. Now, Pierre Poilievre, of course, was very quick to take a swing at Mark Carney before his announcement, but we've heard him increasingly say his name. Have a listen to some of what Pierre Poilievre had to say earlier today.
I want to thank the incredible workers who build these beautiful homes. They are the backbone of our country, and it would be nice if the people who built our homes could afford to live in those homes again, like they could before the 9 years of the Carney, Freeland, Trudeau Liberal government.
And Poilievre, saying that he believes that Carney would bring in policies that would kill the Canadian economy. We know that the Conservatives have also taken out an ad calling him Carbon Tax Carney, which is a favorite sort of nickname that Poilievre has for him. And of course, the Conservatives continue to have a huge gain on the Liberals based on the latest polls. The Conservatives are sitting at a 44% support. The Liberals have less than half of that. And so Carney was also asked, hey, do you think you're going to stay on into the next election? If you lose, will you stay there? And he did say, I've committed to this. I've committed to rebuilding this party. And asked about his financial background, his financial dealings, something the Conservatives were bringing up earlier today, really saying that, he's painting himself as an everyman, but he has this financial background. He's got wealth. He said he's really kind of stepped away from all those roles and that what he wants to do is focus on politics now.
It's interesting when we're talking about sort of who that new leader needs to be. Does it need to be, someone who's fresh? Mark Carney is certainly touting himself to be one of those individuals. Or is it someone that people are familiar with? And there are two others we know that are expected to launch their campaigns for leadership this weekend. So why don't you tell us who?
Yeah, so of course, Chrystia Freeland is the other kind of big name that has been going around, the former finance minister and former deputy prime minister of Canada. We know that she is expecting to launch her campaign this Sunday in her riding of University Rosedale, that's in Toronto. And we also know that House Leader Karina Gould is expected to launch her campaign this weekend in Burlington, Ontario. Karina Gould would potentially be the youngest person vying for the Liberal leadership. She's under the age of 40. And she's been very quiet on kind of what her sort of stance would be on things. But one thing she did answer to reporters the other day when she was asked questions was, you might be one of the youngest people running. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's a strength or is that a weakness? And she said, I think it's really important that someone in this race is coming from this perspective, from a younger perspective, and understands the reality that people are facing. But we know that Chrystia Freeland is going to be launching that campaign on the weekend as well, and we'll definitely be watching to see what happens there.
Indeed, certainly a lot to talk about it with, of course, that inauguration happening on Monday. Marina, thank you so much for this. CBC's Marina von Stackelberg for us in Ottawa. So a lot we heard there from Marina, but of course many Canadians are still trying to get to know who Mark Carney is. My next guest, however, can certainly give us a sense of the man behind the candidate. David Lametti is a former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and back when he and Carney were both students at Oxford University, they co-captained the Ice Hockey Club. And we reached David Lametti in Montreal. Good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us here in Canada tonight.
Great to be with you, Julia.
Give us a bit of an insight to who Mr. Mark Carney was back in the days when you guys were co-captaining that hockey team.
Well, look, he was, and I'm glad you said hockey this time and not ice hockey. We're back in Canada, so let's call it what it is, which is hockey.
Yes.
When we're in the UK, we bear the burden of the adjective as colonial imports, but there we are. Look, when we were there, we were graduate students. Mark was a bright graduate student doing first a master's and then a doctoral degree in economics. He had come out of the private sector. As you know, he went to Harvard to play hockey. Went to Goldman Sachs, worked a bit around the world, New York and Tokyo, and then stepped out of it. Got a Commonwealth scholarship, and stepped out of it to do his doctoral studies at Oxford. So he did his doctoral studies at Oxford on scholarship money, as he did at Harvard. He came from a modest middle-class background in Edmonton. And so he did his degree in economics. He met his future wife, Diana, who is English. They got married in the summer of 1994. He stayed there for a few years, went back to Goldman Sachs, and then came back to Canada.
And we also understand that his wife, of course, she played on the women's hockey team, my understanding is, so that there was sort of that hockey connection.
That's in fact how, that was a public service that we all did, helping to coach the women's team.
There you go. But was politics, do you think politics was sort of ever a thought, a glimmer in his future? Did you ever get that sense?
Well, I think public service has always been a big part of his ethos. It's something we've discussed a lot, when he was at the bank, even when we were talking about careers all the way through. So politics generally with a small p, absolutely. I know his father had a tie to the Pierre Trudeau Liberals. And Mark was always one to step up and lead. And I think that's indicative now. He's very much a leader. He very much wants to help, and he wants to give back to Canada. I mean, this country, again, has been very good to him and his family. He worked, as I said, he worked his way up through a middle-class upbringing to really the top of the financial world in Canada and then in London, and then in the private sector. I mean, he's had an absolutely amazing career. He stepped up once, as people know from his book, in 2008 when he was governor of the Bank of Canada. He worked very hard with the government. It was the Harper government at the time, and Minister Jim Flaherty and the banks in Canada, to make sure that we did not see the impact of the asset-backed mortgage breakdown that we saw in the United States. We got through that period a whole lot better because of Mark Carney.
And he has been, in just sort of brief that we saw in his announcement today, sort of touting more of that sort of economic focus, saying that, we need to push more towards the center. Do you support his bid? I mean, if you were still if you still maintained your position as an MP, I know you officially resigned from your position in February, but would you be one of those MPs supporting him? Would you support the bid?
I am supporting the bid. I formally supported it on social media this evening. And I will do whatever I can to get Mark elected to be leader of the Liberal Party. I think he will be a fantastic leader for the party. He is focused on the economy. He is going to roll out a plan in upcoming weeks. And I just think this is the voice that we need. It's a calm voice. He's brilliant. He's funny. You saw the exchanges with Jon Stewart, something I've known in the dressing room for a long time. He's very funny. He's very quick. But he's also down to earth, and he has maintained that common touch. We will benefit from his smarts, to be honest with you. And we're moving into a tough time. We have to deal with a United States that's become very unpredictable. We have to deal with climate change. We have to deal with a world that's become much more unpredictable as well. And who do you want? Do you want somebody who's serious? Do you want someone who understands the economy? Do you want someone with a proven record of crisis management, both at the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England? Or do you want someone who boils everything down into three-word slogans and is always negative and making fun of people's names and that sort of thing? Like, frankly, this is giving Canadians a choice for a real leader for a tough time that's upcoming.
He did, however, when he did shift over to the Bank of England, a lot of people weren't happy about that, saying that he kind of abandoned Canada. Now, of course, he's coming back and reintroducing, himself. What about that level of trust and that will Canadians be able to connect with him?
Oh, I think they will. He's never stopped being a Canadian. He was recruited to the Bank of England because he had impressed a number of people while he was at the Bank of Canada. But he's always, the intention was always to come back. They never sold their house, they rented it. And he's been back since 2020, I believe. I'm trying to remember the timing now. So he's been back a while. And he's always identified himself, as a Canadian. Yes, he's got dual citizenship with Ireland, but he's a Canadian first and foremost, and he wears those colors really proudly. You speak, as I see, you're right there strong on his side of the line indeed, Mr. Lametti, but I have to also ask you, though, if he were to become the new leader of the Liberal Party, and of course he's vying again to become Prime Minister, would you consider coming back? Would you consider coming back into politics and running and perhaps having a seat in the House of Commons? Under Mark Carney. I left the House of Commons. It was a difficult decision. I left I left cabinet, and it was a hard thing to accept. I've landed well. I'm really happy where I am at Fasken. I've got a great practice in Indigenous law and in artificial intelligence and tech law, and that's going really well. I've gotten a lot of support from the Fasken people. I'm going to help Mark become leader, and I'm going to help Mark become Prime Minister, because that's good for Canada, and that will be my contribution.
David Lametti, thank you so much for giving us your time today, former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada. Thank you again.
Thank you.